Hey guys, Stealth here. In this deck review we're looking at a DLC3 deck. So it's a temporary deck because the beta is still in progress and in January we're going to get the full release. But for now let's have a look at a French deck. It is with the DLC3, so some of the unit ranges have been changed, but otherwise no new units have been introduced for the French. So we only need to look at some of the new specs, but don't have to look at any of the new units. Now, Tonomas sent in this deck and he says it's a French General deck. I use it in 2v2s or more. I want my deck to be able to fight any situation and any type of enemy without necessarily being better at something in particular. He wants to know what the flaws of the deck are and how he can improve upon it. Well, it's a pretty difficult mission profile. Having a deck that can do anything and not suffer anywhere is very, very hard to build, and there are not that many countries which can pull it off. The French might be able to pull it off, but what the French do lack is armor. And that means that you're going to have to be fighting a little bit defensively, because the French excel in fast ambushes and quickly getting out once they have fired their shots. So this is something that we need to keep in mind. Armor is not going to be the strong suit, but once you know that setback for this deck, you should be able to make good use of it. Now, let's go into the deck review itself. I would not change anything here in logistics. He just has a couple of command vehicles, a FOB, a VLRA logistics card, and logistics choppers. One thing you need to know about these guys is that they carry a little bit less supplies than the helicopters. They carry 800 versus the helicopters 1000. And that means that they pretty much drain an entire helicopter. So you need to keep these guys on the move to your FOB and back all the time to make sure that the VLRAs can keep supplying your front line. Once you know that, you should be able to have a very, very decent supply line this way. If you have a map which is very, very open, let's say a 10v10, VLRA logistic trucks might not be that effective, and you might want to switch this card out for another card of Puma 330L logistic choppers. In Infantry, we find Milan F3s, Mistrals, Legions, Commando Marines, and 24 Chasseur 85. Now, this is a pretty high number. Depending on the type of operation you want to do, I think 24 is too much. You got way too many infantry units this way, and what we could do is just switch this up to hardened, and with that you also get slightly improved AMX 10Ps. Plus, the Chasseur 85 do have a very, very decent anti-tank weapon, and I'm not sure if they improved or nerfed the range on this thing because I don't have the patch notes handy at the moment. But I think that this range was 875 and they nerfed it to 700 for the LREC F1. Anyway, let's first make that change. So the chasseurs are going to be hardened. This way you still have plenty of infantry, and so long as you can prevent them from dying, so long as just one man makes it out, you still have a fighting squad. If you don't particularly like the chasseurs, you could have a look at the Rimas, but Rimas don't get the AMX 10P. They do get the VAP 2013, but it's slightly less armored, and you only get 10 or 7 of those, so that is a trade-off that you need to make. Or if you don't want to have the autocannon, you can just take the regular VAP, and you get 14 or 10 troops. So it depends again on the type of encounter, but for his general I want to fight everything mission profile, I think that 19 Chasseur 85 should be okay. Then he has HGM Milan F3s. These are 7 of them at trained. I'm a bit torn between the mission profiles because he says I want to be able to do 2v2 and more, and that means that in a 2v2 it might be nice to have 7 of them. If you're doing more, say in the 10v10 type, you don't really need 7. I found that 5 of them is more than enough. So for the sake of having a very, very general scope, I'm going to keep this at 7 at trained. Then he has one card of Mistrals. He has 7 of these. Again, 7 or 5. I'm going to stick to the 7 because he wants to be able to tackle everything, and the accuracy on these things is pretty good already. Then he has 14 Legion 90 units. These are the hardened variety, not the veteran. And by the looks of it, combined with the Commando Marines and their Panther, this is going to be this quick strike force. Probably a land grabs. And I do approve of this setup. You could say that having a pirate is a little better because it comes with autocannons. The problem though is that you're going to have to sacrifice some availability. You're going to have to go from 10 to 7 versus 14 to 10. And 14 Legionnaires at Hardened is, well, it's pretty good. 10 of them at Veteran would be better, but it would limit the effectiveness of his deck. On the other hand, when are you ever going to use 14 Legion 90s? Now I'm going to change this to 10. In a 2v2 game, an 8v8, a 10v10, it doesn't really matter, but you don't really need 14 Legionnaires. Especially now that we have 19 chasseurs to back them up. Finally, there's the Commando Marines in their Panther. Panthers are very, very quick helicopters, 300 kph. I believe that if you take this card, you get a slightly higher amount of them. You get 10 or 7 versus 7 or 5. Now the Panther is a nice helicopter, and those snap rocket pods can definitely be helpful. But if you want more Commando Marines, you could go with the Panther, the Puma 330H. For now, I'm going to assume that he picked these cards for a reason. That he wanted the quick mobility of the Panther, and the Puma is slightly slower. So we'll just stick to the Panther with his 7 Commando Marines. In support, he has 10 AMX Roland 3s, 7 Crotals, 2 Caesars. So artillery is solid. It would be nice to have another card of mortars, but in a general deck you just have to make choices. 10 Rolands I think is a bit much, because you're lacking out, or you're missing out on some of the other nice AA units. And I'm always a big fan of the VLRA Mistrals, because these guys have infrared missiles, 8 of them. The range might not be as good as the one on the Crotal or the AMX Roland. In fact, it's pretty much a lot worse, 2800 versus 2600, and the range against airplanes is even less. But if you use the Mistral, you can deploy 2 cards of the, or 2 units of these for almost the same price as 1 Roland. And they're a lot more accurate than the Crotal. Or actually they used to be. I think the Crotal just got buffed to 60% accuracy from 40. So that makes the Crotal a lot more viable. In that case, we're just going to keep this setup all the same. Because you don't need an improved Crotal, or you don't need a Mistral over the Crotal. Because at this point, the Crotal, even though it has less missiles, is actually a little bit more viable as an anti-helicopter weapon than the Roland. The one thing that you could do is say, well, the Crotals are good, but I'm expecting a little bit more helicopter maneuvering on the enemy team. Say if you're fighting an airborne deck, you could quickly swap out 1 Roland and bring in, say, 1 more Crotal. And this way you still have a decent range against airplanes, but you have a longer range against helicopters. And since helicopters, well, yeah, it depends on the deck you're facing, seem to be used more than planes, you could say that this is a slightly better setup, but then it's very, very subjective. In tanks, he has quite a lot of units. Of course, there's the Leclerc. 4 of these at trained. I would do nothing other than this. Then he has 19 AMX 30B2s. I think that's a very, very high amount, especially combined with AMX 30B2 Brennus and AMX 40s. So what we could do here is switch these out and switch them to hardened. Then the AMX 40s. These guys are nice tanks, and you do want to keep these in the game. Looking at the AP value, I think that this got buffed. I haven't been over the patch notes yet. I will do that when the actual DLC gets released. But for now, I think that this thing has been buffed quite a bit. We're not going to change the AMX 40, we're not going to touch those. And then he has the AMX 30B2 Brennus. Now, the Brennus is a good tank. It has the autocannon, it has the main gun. The armor is a little bit on the light side, but having 10 of these combined with the other tanks should be enough. I don't think you need 14, unless you want to do some sort of suicidal push like we just saw in my Here Comes the Flood video. Moving on to reconnaissance, we find 7 Commando Para, 10 Hussards, 5 Mistrals and 7 Alouettes. I think this is a very, very high amount. It depends, of course, what you want to use these Commandos Para for. But what I think is best is using these as commandos, as the title indicates. So using them to go behind enemy lines and engage the enemy right there, or to spot, because they got very good stealth, and these guys only got, oh sorry, they also got very good stealth. That might have been buffed, I'm not sure. But this is 17 passive spotters, or that's the way I use them. What I would do here is switch out 7 Commander Marines and swap in 5 Hardened. And what we can also do here with the Hussards is, well, it's 10 of them. It depends on what you want to do with them. If you want to have a very high recon amount in your main battle, I don't think that you need 10. I think that 7 of them will do. We could do an interesting trick here and bring them in a Puma Pirate, because that still gives us enough of these Hussards, and it gives you something of an attack chopper with the autocannons. So let's switch those to Hardened. I snooped off a couple of his units from recon, but I think he still has enough here. The Mistrals are of course very nice units. They come with the Mistrals, and those Mistrals can pop up very unexpectedly. Then he has 7 Alouette choppers, and that is also a very good idea. Always have your recon choppers in. You could go for the Gazelle cannons, but the cannons have have good optics versus the very good on the Alouette. The one thing I don't like about the Alouette is that it's too slow, 210 versus 310. So once the Alouette gets spotted, once you have something coming after it, like an Mi-24 Hind armed with AA missiles, you are usually in trouble. In vehicles, he has the ERC-90 Sagae, and this one is a very quick engagement unit. This is something that the French do very well, and it's amphibious. That makes it an excellent unit. Having a couple of these, spreading them around your front lines, will make it so that you can deploy a gun which has 11 AP damage onto pretty much anywhere on the front line, seeing as they go 95 off-road and 48 in the water, which is very quick for off-road for amphibious units. So you can have these guys pop up in unexpected places. He has 14 of them. That's at Hardened. I don't think you need to switch these to 19, so I agree with his choice. Then he has AMX-10P Milans. These are of course equipped with the Milan F1, and the Mephistos are equipped with the Hot 1. Now there's a slight difference between these two. The Hot ones get a slightly bigger range, 26-25, versus only 24-50. Their accuracy is a little bit better, and their AP power is a lot better. Also, their mobility is greatly improved over the AMX-10P, 65 kph off-road versus 90. Of course, you don't really have to look at road speed, and tracked vehicles always get 110, wheeled vehicles always get 150. It depends on how he wants to use these things. I'm not familiar with his playstyle. I don't know the way he uses these guys. But I think that with this setup he has too many ATGM vehicles, and that we can possibly come up with a more effective setup. What I would do here is scratch these AMX-10P Milans or scratch the AMX Hots, because these pretty much have the same mission profile, anti-tank warfare, but these guys also have an autocannon, whereas these guys only have their missile launcher. But they get 16 versus 12. Then there's the Mephisto, so he has way too many of them. Now what I would do here is bring one card of Mephistos, because they're nice and mobile. You can park them in an unexpected location, or have them float across an amphibious, or doing an amphibious operation with the ERC-90s. Then I would bring, for example, the Milan 2. Don't underestimate these little jeeps, because you can spread them around the front lines, and they can be very annoying. They only need to hit 1 or 2 missiles out of their 4, and with a 40% accuracy you're lucky if you can get 3 or 4 hits. But with this, they only have to score, say, 1 or 2 IFVs, and they already regained their point value. You do have to babysit them. They only got 4 missiles, but after that you should, well, you can either discard them and use them as passive or active recon, or you can resupply them and try to get them back to the front line. So these are nice to haves. And then I would bring in the AMX 10P Milans and bring 10 of those at hardened. Reason for this being that they have an autocannon and an ATGM, which makes them slightly more flexible than the AMX HOTs, and we already got those Hot 1 missiles on the Mephisto. Unfortunately, these things are not as quick in their amphibious operation, while they are amphibious. And with this, with the Mephisto, the Milan and the ERC-90, you do have a very nice amphibious force. This one can quickly engage targets with the 11 AP power gun. This one can take down heavily armored vehicles, and this one with the autocannon can engage infantry. And of course helicopters. The only thing that you're lacking is longer range AA. But what you could do is try to bring a Crotal. Unfortunately those things are not amphibious, so you're going to have to keep that in mind. If you want to make this deck a little bit more amphibious, you could go with the VAB VDAA, because this thing is amphibious, and then you have a longer anti-helicopter range. So that with 4 cards, or 5 cards if you will, you have an amphibious force, without actually having anything in the naval category. In helicopters, it's pretty much the usual suspects. We got the Celtic, we got the Tiger Hap and the Had, and there's not a lot I would change about this. Having 4 of these at trained versus 2 at hardened is always going to be favorable to have 4 at trained from both the Hap and the Had. And with this you got a very, very solid pretty much anti-everything force. They can engage helicopters, they can engage ground targets, being tanks or infantry. And these GA-30 autocannons are very, very deadly. The Celtics are always nice, especially if you want to do a quick land grab, which he seems to do with his Commando Marines and the Legions. And we can even deploy some Commando Marines in their pirates or some Hussars with that initial group. And with that, having a Celtic or 2 escort them, it's very, very nice to have. In the air tab, there is 4 Mirage 2000C RDIs, which is an interesting choice for an air superiority fighter. I'm not sure why he went with these guys. You do get a high amount of them, and they do have nice ECM. The range on them is pretty good, but it's a semi-active missile. I would like to have a airplane which has a 7,000 meter range. But then again, the Rafale of course only gives you 1 unit versus the 4 of this one. Alternatively, you could go with the the Mirage F1C200, but it's an even worse plane. So yeah, I think that this is pretty much the best option. Then he has Jaguar Ace Seaplanes. He has 2 of these. If you want to have more of them with a even higher chance to hit, you go with 1 veteran. But usually these things survive well enough. Mirage SFs, or 5Fs, sorry, long range, more or less carpet bombers with their 8 400 kilogram bombs. Makes them very capable against pushes, especially with vehicles, because against tanks they're mostly going to do stun damage and morale damage, but not so much actual physical damage. Not a lot I would change here. And then he has the Mirage 1 CT with the cluster bomb. The one thing that you could say he is missing is the Super Etendar. And with this you don't have a tank sniper, which could be very, very detrimental to this deck, although you do have quite a bit of AT capability already in the vehicle tab. But I'm thinking, what do you do with this deck if you engage a T-80U, for example, or one of the super high-end T-72s? Because while these ATGMs will do some damage, they're not going to do a ton of it. And even the helicopters with their 25 AP power are going to struggle against those tanks. So what we could do is take out one of these bombers, but the question is which. Because you do want to have all of them in here. You want to have the Siege, you want to have bombers, you want to have the cluster bombers. But I think that ditching the cluster bombers is going to be the least negative effect on this deck. Because these guys you use against groups of tanks, which is something that the Mirage 5Fs are going to have to deal with more or less, in combination with helicopters as a quick response force. These guys cannot engage infantry anyway, so let's delete those and go with 4 Super Etendars at rookie. If you want to have a high point tactical game, you can go with 2 at veteran, but his mission profile was 2v2 fighting anything, anywhere. So for that reason, we're going to go with 4 of them. Then in the Naval tab, he has 3 Lafayettes, 5 Pohangs, 8 Chamseries. That's a very decent anti-missile defense. The Pohangs, of course, there's 5 of these. I would switch those to 4 because I think that's still enough, and Hardened gives them a little bit more accuracy, which is very, very beneficial to that Dardo Seawiz. So it makes the entire battle group a little bit more survivable. The Lafayettes are great ships. I'm not sure why these Tornado MFGs are in here though. There are better anti-ship planes that you can pick from, and I would either go all anti-ship planes or all ships, because right now he cannot resupply his ships. So what I'm going to do is delete the Tornado and bring one LCU. The LCU can be used for anything, whether it's resupplying the Pohang with more harpoon missiles, resupplying the Lafayettes with more Crotals, repairing the Chamseries if they took a hit or two. And with this you can also keep using that Otomalara, the Bofors L60 and the 68TR main guns on those ships, which makes it very, very capable as a close coastal support. So I hope that with this deck, Tonomas is going to be able to counter and tackle any threat. Of course, no deck is perfect, and having a pure can do anything deck, you're going to be missing out on something. You're going to be missing out on high-end AT weaponry. I usually go for a deck which is more or less general, but which is geared towards either mechanized or armored or airborne, because you get slightly better units. You do miss out on some of the others, but with this deck I think he has a very good chance of surviving pretty much anything that's being thrown at him, provided that he uses the right units at the right time, of course. But then again, that's my opinion. Let me know what you think of this deck in the description, or sorry, in the comments down below. If you want to use this deck, the deck code is in the description. And in the description you're also going to find a link on how to send me your deck. Now do note that I will not be doing very many DLC3 Beta decks, because I don't think it's the best use of my time. Since DLC3 is going to be coming out in January, it's not really that useful for either you or me to be doing videos on a DLC that's going to be changing anyway. Anyway, hope you liked watching this video. If you did, please hit like and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already. If you still have a question about this deck, leave it in the description, in the comments down below, and I hope to see you next video.